explore the dark and thrilling worlds of apocalyptic, dystopian, horror, fantasy, and sci-fi media?
Yeah.
Welcome to the Final Chapter Book Club, where we dive deep into the most gripping tales of survival, despair, and the unknown. Join us as we review the latest and greatest media, discuss mind. Today we're going to be discussing Willie the Weirdo from Stephen King's new novel, You Like It Darker, which is a collection of 12 short stories. This story is really, really good. I really liked this one more than I thought I
Uh,
would. The start of it, I was like really freaked out. But
sure, you go first.
just to give you a rundown of the storyline. So, Willie is a 13-year-old boy who is a little odd compared to most kids. He has a very odd obsession with death. And he has a grandfather at home who lives with him and his family. And his grandfather pretty much feeds into that attraction that Willie seems to have when it comes to death. And he asks his grandfather about all these fanatical, fantastical stories of things that his grandfather claims he did, of beating up black people as a cop, and then, witnessing Cleopatra being poisoned and different things like that. And it's just very odd, and it feels like a bunch of lies, but this 13-year-old boy loves his grandfather inherently. And of course, his grandfather is one of the few adults in his life that don't seem to treat him differently or act as though he's weird. And so in the end, the grandfather gets very sick with cancer, and Willie asks his grandfather if he can be there so that he can watch his grandfather pass away. When the time comes, the grandfather grabs Willie by the back of the neck and drags him in real close and tells him to watch. And then later, as Willie leaves the room, he hears his mother and sister talking about how difficult taking care of the grandfather is and how she's uncertain that she can deal with it anymore. And Willie says, well, he's dead. And then basically the story's over. And I know this, like, in my short description of it, it doesn't seem like much of a story, but there's a lot that kind of happened within everything. Jason, if
Many
you want to
layers.
start. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, so Willie, first of all, the description that they give is from the very beginning, Willie is weird.
Mm-hmm.
All the kids in school think he's weird, and it's not really the way that he talks or the way that he interacts with other people, it's the things that he puts his interest into. Like, for instance, he sees a dead badger or beaver or squirrel in the gutter, and he sits down on the ground and
Mm-hmm.
watches it. And it's
It's a
raining
mole.
outside, a mole,
A
and he's
mole,
waiting
yeah.
for the water to wash it down the drain. He's sitting in front of the storm drain, and he sits there, and he spends half the day watching the water try to wash this dead mole down the drain because he's just fascinated. He just wants to see what it looks like as it goes down there. And it's like, yeah, that's weird, bro. Like, that is
Mm-hmm.
very weird. But there's other things too. His grandfather tells him all these fantastic stories about times that he claims to have been in. He claims to have actually been there when Cleopatra was killed. He claims he was at Gettysburg when Pickett did his charge, and he said he
Mm-hmm.
saw the Willie asks him over and over to tell him the story about Gettysburg, and he said the old man tells him, the grandfather tells him, hey, yeah, I was there, and there's this trumpeter, this kid, and he rushed forward in front of the soldiers, and he got shot in the throat, and Willie's like, what did it look like? And the grandfather's like, oh, the blood, oh, it was glistening in the sun. And Willie's like, ooh, and it's like, ooh, you weirdo. Yeah, you don't think much of it. You think they're stories, but there's something about the way that he tells the stories. He
Mm-hmm.
doesn't deviate because he tells the story about Gettysburg more than once. He doesn't go into detail only that one time, but you get the feeling like the way Willie says, hey, tell me the story about Gettysburg again. And he's like, oh, and he passes up what was going on and just says, this kid got shot in the throat and I saw it and he died right there. And Willie's like, wow. And, tell me about how you were in Selma. And he's like, oh, yeah, I was in Selma beating up, black people. But I only did it because they told me to. And where else was he? Was he in Nazi Germany? Was he in, like how many other terrible places has his
Mm-hmm.
grandfather been in to casually witness death? And
Mm-hmm.
grandfather doesn't seem like it bothers him at all. It seems like, oh,
Mm-mm.
yeah, it's very strange because the only thing that Willie is interested in is death.
Hmm.
and the grandfather has an abundance of death stories. Isn't that like such a coincidental thing?
But it's not
But
just
like,
about like these stories, but like the content of them. Talking about Selma, just like I mean, the
casual
generation
evil
he would
again.
be
It's like,
like I guess like the boomer generation, which tends to be more of a racist generation and things like that. It was like some of the things that like the grandfather was talking about, it was almost like he was proud of what he did, but he's like trying to make
no.
excuses like I only did it because they told me to, but it's like
Yeah, no,
you
it's
still
the
had a
banality of
choice.
evil again. It goes back to what the Nazis all said at Nuremberg, which was, I only did what I was told. I'm not the guy. It's the other guy, my boss that you should be doing. I only put people in the gas chamber
Mm-hmm.
and turned it on. I only shot these kids in the back of the head. I
Mm-hmm.
only, burned this whole family alive. That's all. It's not
Yeah.
me you should be after because I didn't mean to do it. I only did it because they told me.
Yeah, it was
That
my
is the worst
job.
excuse. That is a huge thing in the Gunslinger series. Banality of evil, how evil is insipid, and it's not always, it doesn't come leering, and it's not announcing itself, and it's not cackling. Sometimes, like I said, it's before it is a face that or it's a
Mm-hmm.
another. It comes in a friendly form, and
Mm-hmm.
it's worse than it's worse than the worst evil.
Mm-hmm.
The end of the
Absolutely.
story is another Twilight Zone kind of flip. Throughout the story, his grandfather does this casual thing where he touches the top of his lip and he's fingering the top of his lip while he's talking about this story. Yeah. And in the end, when his grandfather dies and he leaves the room and he tells his mom casually again, like, oh, grandfather's dead. What? No biggie, pours a glass of milk. They look at him and they're just wondering if what he's saying is real or not. And they see him touching his lip,
Like
but
grandfather
never
always did.
like grandfather did. What? So the implications are staggering. The implications are when grandfather pulled him close and said, "Take a look at death. This is what you wanted." It's not
Mm-hmm.
just to give him what he wanted to like let him see. It's actually that grandfather's body switching. He's jumping
Mm-hmm.
bodies. And he was at Gettysburg, and he was at Selma, and he was in Egypt, and he was in Germany. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God. And like it just again, it's just the very last sentence because it just says, Willie reaches up and touches the top of his lip. It's almost like a very normal story about accepting death, which is something that I'm very cool with. You wanna,
Mm-hmm. It's
and
something
there's hardly any
everyone
stories.
experiences.
Yeah, there's hardly any stories about where people have a good experience with death. It's usually a very crushing, heartbreaking thing. And in the end, it has to be very dramatic and there has to be a big resolution. And in the end, you see that it was all about love. Death is about love. It's part of the cycle. But
And this
then,
wasn't that.
no,
If
there's no
the
end to the
if the
cycle.
implication that the grandfather is like body snatching,
Yes.
if that's the case, then
And that's,
basically you almost kind of want to get into the entity of what is the grandfather more,
again,
because it's like what is this guy? And again, Stephen King, like we've discussed before, he loves like having this outside otherworldly evil, like something that is magical or mystical,
yeah,
fantastical. And
yeah.
so it's like, what is he? Because he's
This
clearly
is,
not human. And he's
well, I
stealing
mean,
bodies and he's living these lives. It's almost like he's purposefully collecting these stories. And I wonder if the entire time, like the grandfather knew his time was coming. But what I also thought was really interesting is that if he is a body snatcher type thing, if this is the case, like, why did he go through the torture that is cancer? Why would he go through that instead of immediately switching
it's
bodies?
an easy thing because he isn't. Maybe he is human with an otherworldly power, something that he can't explain, and that he does accept death, and it's part of it's part of his transformation. And Willie and him aren't actually related. That Willie's
Mm-hmm.
father was adopted when he
Adopted.
was a
Mm-hmm.
baby by this guy, and they've always treated him like family. And so just the way that Stephen King wrote it, the family, friends, everybody thought it was weird that Willie bonded with his grandfather so much because there weren't blood relatives. And then other people were like, it's because of the stories. It's because of the stories. So grandfather was grooming the father also before, but it didn't work with the father. He wanted to jump bodies with Willie's father, and it didn't work.
Oh.
But it had to be a male. For some reason, it has to be a
Yeah.
male. He's always telling a story about a male. There are people that he can use by just telling the stories to that will be fascinated, and it opens them up to him switching bodies with them. Maybe he was the one that was murdered at one time. We don't know. Like, is it just his
Mm-hmm.
death that triggers it? Because if it's just cancer, like, does someone have to be right next to him? Was he the drummer boy that got shot in the throat and
Oh, and
jumped to
he jumped.
somebody else?
Oh,
Was he,
I
you know what I
love that.
mean?
No,
That's
that's
what
so cool.
and
I
that
love
made
that.
my skin crawl. And I was just like, oh no, he's recounting memories. It's not memories of things that he saw, because why would that be
It's
important?
what he
No, it's
lived through.
it's what he died. He was freaking Cleopatra. He was, you know what I mean? He was these famous
Yeah.
people. The way that he's
Oh,
written
that's
these
such a
these three
cool
stories so
thought.
far, and I think it continues throughout the whole book, is that he's mastered the open end of a story to where you can read the last paragraph and go, "What?" and go, "No, I need
I
more,"
need
and go,
more.
"Okay,
Yeah.
yes," and go, "You know what? That was a great story, but man, holy crap." Like, and I've always said this too, like some of the best movies, TV shows, they end flat like that, and you're like
Mm-hmm.
wondering, you at first your reaction is no, you want them to tell you the story, but then if you think about it and you really, absorb it all and reflect on it, you start to go, oh, but wait, it could be this or it could be that, and
Mm-hmm.
that's so much more fun than them telling you, hey, they lived happily ever after. No, what
Mm-hmm.
happened before? Like Stephen King used to do it with some of his earlier stuff, but he also had the tendency to like tie everything up in a bow. And, like in Carrie, you're reading about this event that happened, and it is clearly a year ago, and everything is, and there's some questions, but it's a finite story, and nobody,
Mm-hmm.
Carrie's dead, her family's dead, the town's dead. Like, there's only a few people left. We've interviewed them, and
Mm-hmm.
in the end, you're like, and it even says in the end, like the reporter's like, such a tragedy, well, we may never know what happened,
Mm-hmm.
to that girl that lived on that, that little small street.
Mm-hmm.
But we do, because we read the whole thing, and
Yeah.
so it's very satisfying. There's no open-endedness,
Mm-hmm.
but these stories are like a whole other breed. And maybe if Stephen King had this been his first collection of stories, he might not have had such a good reaction. Even in a lot of his earlier short stories from Skeleton Crew and stuff, they end with, like I said, with a bow on them. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there might be a little bit of, oh, that guy was a killer, or oh, they were in the house the whole time, but you still feel like you're not going, but they escaped. Stanley Kubrick was really good with that, where he'd paint a really vivid picture on the screen and tell you the story that you're really kind of familiar with, but like leave so much, like in the end of Full
To
Metal
the
Jacket, there's this whole
imagination.
scene,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, where there's a sniper bearing down on the squad that you've grown with. You've got to know all these people, and you just see him get picked off, and there's no words for like 15 minutes. Nobody talks. It's just them maneuvering and making hand signals, moving around in this burned out like shell of buildings,
Mm-hmm.
and in the end, they find out that the sniper that's killing them all is like a little 13-year-old kid, and they kill her, and it's terrible. It's like.
Yeah. It's tragedy. Mm-hmm.
But I still like the idea that like if he dies, he's gonna jump into someone, and maybe it's not his choice, but
So
he's choosing
basically,
this
that
kid.
makes me wonder if the story of Willie watching the mole, like circling the sewer and getting ready to go down, if that is a
Yeah.
metaphor, because that's the
Oh
grandfather
yeah.
waiting on death to come so that new life can begin for
Yeah, no, it was
him.
definitely that. Like the whole story was about grandfather's decline, and it kind of coincided with Willie's. They thought Willie was getting depressed, and it wasn't. He wasn't getting depressed. He was getting
Mm-mm.
excited that grandfather was closer to death.
I wonder too, like in the story, it talks about how basically the father didn't really want anything to do with Willie. Or
Yeah, no,
really,
that's
the father seemed very set apart from the family in general.
yeah.
And then you really kind of get to know the sister and mom's dynamic. Now, it's normal for older sisters to be annoyed by their younger brothers. So, like, her interactions with him, to me, seemed perfectly normal for an older sister. Like, you're freaking weird,
Weirdo.
bro.
Yeah.
But like for the mom, the mom and sister are standing there doing dishes together after supper one night. And the mom basically outright says, like, he's weird, but we love him anyway.
Yeah,
He's
they
definitely
dismissed it.
weird though. But
Yeah.
like what I thought was so interesting is like they never did anything to like meet him where he was at. Which I
No.
don't know, like they didn't try to, but they also didn't try to force him to stop talking and thinking about death either, which I thought was odd again. Like, I
Yeah,
feel
they're
like
so
as a
passive.
parent, like you'd want to step in and maybe intervene a little bit. Like, that's a really weird hobby and enjoyment.
Two
Like,
things. The grandfather is weird, and the grandfather loves telling stories about death. They know that and they accept it already. So it's maybe not such a coincidence that Willie's weird. You know what I mean? Maybe Willie wasn't always weird. Maybe he's just a weird ass grandpa telling all these stories about seeing people dying all the time has,
it's
done
just
something
still,
to
it's
this
very
kid.
odd to me because, like, the grandfather could, like,
Well,
be shrugged off
also,
as, like, he's got PTSD and he's old
why
and
is the
stuff.
mom friends with the grandfather when it's not her dad and it's not her husband's dad either? Like, you know what I mean? Where is the dad?
Well, I think that just has to do with like normal matronly duty in families. Like it was the
But
women in
again,
my
it's
family that had to
accepting.
take care of my grandmother, and
Mhm.
like my
It's
aunt stepped in, and even though she's not blood related to my grandmother, she helped just as much when my grandmother started to
So
decline.
there it is. That kind of nails it too. So now they think grandfather's not weird. Willie's weird.
Hmm.
And grandfather's just entertaining Willie. And grandfather can't help himself because he's old. That's like,
Hmm.
again, they're just excusing his behavior. They know that he's going to tell stories to the kid, and the kid's going to ask him, and the grandfather can't help himself but say the stories,
It's still
and they
weird
know
though.
what they are. I
Because,
know, that's
like,
what I'm
as a
saying. They
parent, like,
accept
you would
it.
still intervene and be like, I know
It's a
grandpa
theme.
tells you all these weird stories
It's a
about
theme
death.
in Stephen King stories about, again, the banality of evil. It's so insipid. Like it's just grandfather. It's not anybody evil. It's our grandfather. So there's
Hmm.
no way he could corrupt our kid. In a lot of Stephen King stories, evil is that way where
Hiding
people
in plain sight
yeah, they know
and
it's there,
making excuses for it.
or maybe they just kind of perceive it, but they ignore it. Yes, they make excuses for it. They ignore it, and most of the time, it's just so beyond their radar.
Hmm.
And it's likely because of the same effect that it has. Like when you see something that's so evil, your brain shuts down. It doesn't want to see that thing. I don't know what happened, but my mind shut it off. Stephen King really addresses it though. That's why I wanted to get back at his in a lot of his stories, like there's evil there, and the main character is going, looking at other people and telling them, "Hey, the thing is right there," and they're going, "Nah,
Hmm.
bro, handle it by yourself because we're just, one person." And it's like
Yeah.
it takes a village of them. Oh, it's always an army. There's always a cast of characters that have to come together to defeat something that. If they would have addressed it sooner, even one person could have made a difference.
It's so scary to think of that big evil being hidden behind your kind grandfather's face, or someone
He's
you
so good at it
trust.
too.
He
I
is really
mean,
good at it.
like I said, the more I think about the story, I'm just like I get creeped out because Willie wasn't really weird. It was his grandfather. Is the kid in there still? If so, that's even worse. Like locked into a mind that he can't control his body with some eternal like
Oh,
grandfather spirit.
I
So
assumed that it was like they body switched, and that
yeah,
the
no, I'm
because
pretty
the
sure.
grandfather was like, you're gonna experience, like, you want to
Yeah,
experience it. So like basically he had to die as his grandfather in his grandfather's body is what I assumed.
yeah. I mean, that would make more sense, but I mean, who knows?
Yeah, it's all up to speculation. That
There's a
and
movie.
that's kind of the theme of the last story too. I know with the first story we went hopeful. The second
Yeah,
story was hopeless.
yeah,
What would be the
despair.
overall theme that we would give this third book? Like this
I don't
third short
know.
story? I
Like,
think it's about betrayal.
I mean,
I think betrayal
is
is
it
the theme
though?
that stood out.
Because the kid wanted death. I mean, I hate to say
I
it
don't
like
think he
that, but
wanted
like,
death though. Nobody, I think, no matter
no, not
how, like, I don't think anybody
nobody.
actually wants death. And
No,
I
no, no.
think the kid was just like you said, he was being groomed by his grandfather and then was forced into this,
What
situation in
if,
the end.
what if the kid's fascination for death was so much that he just was willing to experience it? Yeah,
I don't know.
that's.
I don't see that
I
because
think you're right,
like
though. The more I think about it, too. Yeah, you're right. I mean, the grandfather definitely. The theme was that Willie was a weirdo, but he was never weird when he wasn't around Grandpa. Like
Mm-hmm.
he only was fascinated with death because of the stories that grandfather told him. And so
Mm-hmm.
Stephen King is not afraid to kill children, and that's something that a lot
Mm-hmm.
of writers and a lot of, things they stay away from in media. You will not see kids getting killed. But yeah, I mean, betrayal is big in there. But I don't think it was so much of a betrayal because, of course, the kid probably didn't know of course, he never knew he was going to die. He didn't think he was going to die. It was almost fitting because he was so into death and he was just like so wanted to see it. And in the end, even when grandfather said, "You want to see death?" He's just like, "Yes." He smiled. He's like, "Let's go." It was like,
I don't know. It's hard to take this
so we knew we were
story.
gonna delve super deep into like emotions and thoughts and like, and this is one of the hard ones when you talk about like the death of a child or like the purposeful, malicious intent towards
Mm-hmm.
ill will of a child. This is it. This is
Yeah.
where we're at right here. This is like directly in the
Mm-hmm.
impact. There's in Doctor Sleep, like there's some psychic vampires that go around the country and kill children to get the shine from their body. They eat
Mm-hmm.
it like it's food and they use it to
Mm-hmm.
sustain them. And they're like eternal. They can live. They're like vampires. Again, it becomes big good versus big evil. Like you got to take
Mm-hmm.
a stand, and there's going to be sacrifices and sorrow. There's going to be mercy, but there's also going to be justice. And
Mm-hmm.
what side do you fall on?
Yeah, and I think that's what's hard about the short stories because it's not about giving it the nice bow like you were talking about. It's about
No,
just giving it that shock and awe factor, and you don't get that justice because
no,
it's like
it's up
you
to
want to
us.
see this grandfather get caught, or you want to see
Yeah,
the little
something
kid get better and like live a good life. You want to see something
never
good happen in
happens.
the end. Man, it's so
Yeah,
hard. It's so hard. Well, thank you so much for coming
yes,
and joining us for our discussion as we work our way through Stephen King's novel, You Like It Darker. This was, again, the third uh, short story in the series called Willie the Weirdo. I have so enjoyed going through this series already, and I hope you
me
guys are
too.
enjoying going through this with us. We've got some
Yes,
big plans coming up for future episodes once we finish with Stephen King's this little series we're working on now. So make certain that you subscribe and ring the bell if you want to be notified of when our episodes go live. And we will
leave a
see
comment.
you. Yes, leave comments. Like
We'll
tell us what you
we'll
think.
interact.
You guys have a wonderful day and we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.